Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war geopolitical news update. I just want to talk about something that Donald Trump shared on Truth Social earlier on today because it was that egregious and it shows you everything you need to know about Donald Trump and his position on Ukraine. I mean, he really is not pro-Ukraine at all. And indeed, we're hearing that there is lots of pressure being put on Ukraine from Americans behind the scene in terms of land swapping. The Economist has said that the Trump team is, quote, unbelievably aggressive toward Ukraine in a land concession push. Kiev officer warned US negotiators are pressing Ukraine to yield territory, raising fears Washington is advancing Russia's interests. So it looks like after the meeting in Alaska that the US has really taken on board Russia's talking points and really is advocating for the Russian proposals. This appears to be exactly what is happening. And unfortunately, Donald Trump is not saying anything to contradict that position. So Trump reposted a message on his Truth Social media platform in which the author claims Ukraine must be willing to give up some territory to Russia or risk losing even more land as the war continues. So the post is this, and remember, this is Donald Trump reposting this, which means he advocates for this position. Ukraine must be willing to lose some territory to Russia. Otherwise, the longer the war goes on, they will keep losing even more land. Okay, the first part of this is absolutely horrific because it is essentially saying that aggressors must be rewarded. Imagine if Donald Trump stood up in public or stated on Truth Social that all burglars that are robbing houses in the United States must be able to keep some of the loot, that all house owners must be willing to lose some of their possessions to the burglars that are robbing their houses. That's a perfectly acceptable analogy in my books. Now, you can say it's stretched when it comes to really representing the complexity of geopolitical strategizing and war. But that first part of the sentence there, Ukraine must be willing to lose some territory to Russia. Homeowners must be willing to give up loot to burglars. Otherwise, the ordeal in their house goes on and they will lose even more possessions. So in order not to lose all of your possessions, you must give up some of your possessions. We are not going to fight for the rights of the homeowner. We are not going to fight for their territorial integrity and their rights to their own possessions. Donald Trump is advocating for the burglar here. This is how bad what he is saying is. This is horrific. I would love to just speak to Donald Trump and give him that analogy and say, honestly, Donald Trump, Mr. Trump, do you now advocate that all homeowners in the United States must be willing to give up some of their loot if their house is burgled? And if you're not advocating that, I would like you to give the rationale as to why you're not advocating for that. Because that rationale will therefore should be applicable to Ukraine. And unless you can show that is not a logically viable analogy, you are just plainly wrong. And you are aligning yourself with the aggressor. This is bad. What Donald Trump has done today is bad. And then when we understand that it is in the context of the US being unbelievably aggressive toward Ukraine, forcing them to give up their land, then the United States, qua the Trump administration, is advocating for international aggressors. The rule of law is now no longer meaningful to the American government. It's that bad. Honestly, it's that bad. Now, the White House apparently does not expect that Trump's meeting with Zelensky will necessarily lead to a three-way meeting with Putin thereafter. So they're trying to, I guess, manage expectations here. They're also saying that Zelensky will meet with Trump first, and then European leaders will be able to join in. So it won't be open to all initially. We have Marco Rubio for the first time actually being wheeled out now and saying stuff, and he is defending the allowance of European leaders to attend the meeting, saying, look, they're not there just to stop Zelensky being bullied by Trump, even though it's pretty obvious that that's exactly why they are there. But we'll come on to that in a second. Let's listen to Marco Rubio.
Mr. Secretary, I want to show folks what Ukraine looks like right now. This is a map of Ukraine. That red section there, that's the area currently under control by Russia. It's about 20% of the entire country. There are reports that Putin is asking to keep all of this territory in a potential deal. Is that what's being discussed? Can you confirm that?
Well, I can confirm that he's given speeches in which he has said that repeatedly.
So he's asking for that now in these private conversations?
Well, look, ultimately, if that...
The answer is yes, that's exactly what Putin has asked for. Those are the proposals sent to the Americans, given to the Americans firsthand, and that is what the Americans are relaying to the Ukrainians. But Rubio knows that this is ridiculous. He knows that this is bad, this is wrong. And he will bumble around trying not to admit this.
That the Ukrainians are not willing to give that up, and no one's pushing Ukraine to give that up. And so I don't think that's what, if there's going to be a peace deal, it's not going to look like that. But he certainly is making demands. He's certainly asking for things that the Ukrainians and others are not willing to be supportive of. And that.
Now, this is good of Marco Rubio. So Marco Rubio was the grown-up in the room, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, Steve Witkoff, whatever. Donald Trump, whatever. Marco Rubio at least knows what Russia is, right? So when they were meeting in Alaska, I imagine Marco Rubio was one of these ashen-faced people that couldn't believe what he was hearing. And he's absolutely right to say, look, Ukraine is not going to agree to these proposals. It is what he doesn't want to admit that that's what the Russians said at the meeting, but he said, look, you've heard it in speeches before from Putin, which is absolutely true. This is nothing new. We know that these are the demands of the Russians. But he's open, clear-eyed enough to say that Ukraine simply will not agree to these demands.
We're not going to push them to give. And the Ukrainians are asking for things that the Russians are not going to give up on. I know this sounds, I know everybody wants to have more detail, but we're trying to have a serious negotiation here and see if we can find any middle ground between two warring parties in a very difficult war where the Russians feel, as they always do, like they have momentum on their side, and the Ukrainians have been incredibly brave in fighting back and in the defensive posture they've taken. The Ukrainians have inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on the Russians. I think last month alone, 20,000 Russian soldiers were killed in 1 month in this war. So the Ukrainians have inflicted tremendous amount of damage on the Russians as a result of this. Both sides are very dug in. This is a difficult one, but we're going to continue to work on it because the president's made it a priority to try to end the war that should have never happened.
What I find a shame consistently with American rhetoric from government officials, including Marco Rubio here, is the reticence to admit that Russia are completely the ones at fault. That actually, if you are seeking a morally decent outcome to this, then Russia must be the ones that should pay. That they are responsible for this war. But he kind of skirts around the issue, says it's a war that should never have happened. Well, do you know what? That's on Putin, that is. It's not on Biden. It's not on Zelensky. That is on Putin. But you never hear the what should be obvious rhetoric from the American administration at the moment. You hear it from the Europeans. You hear it from, obviously, the Ukrainians, but not from, unfortunately, the Trump administration. Here's Rubio again.
place on the day he took over remain. And the impact of all those sanctions remain. You know, when the Russians landed in Alaska, they were there to refuel. They had to offer to pay in cash to refuel their airplanes because they can't use our banking system. They face consequences every single day. But the bottom line is that has not altered the direction of this war. That doesn't mean those sanctions are inappropriate. It means it hasn't altered the outcome of it. And here's what we do think is important, and that is that we end this war. To end this war, you have to be able to engage with the Russians. As much as people may not like it, as distasteful as people may find it, the only way to end this war is to get the Russians to agree, as well as the Ukrainians, but the Russians to agree to a peace deal. And the minute you issue new sanctions, your ability to get them to the table, our ability to get them to the table, will be severely diminished. That moment may arrive, but when it comes, what you're basically signaling is there is no opportunity for peace at this point. So just let's put on more sanctions and allow more people to get bombed and more people to be killed. And that's what we're trying to stop.
And unfortunately, here we have Marco Rubio not really recognizing that you should have a scenario whereby Putin is forced to the table. He says, look, if we're going to put sanctions on them, then they're not going to come to the table. No, they should be forced to this table by putting sanctions on them, cripple their economy, make them beg, and that is where they will be forced to come to the table. And here's a bit where Rubio denies that Trump is going to be bullying Zelensky.
You know, there is concern from the Europeans that President Zelensky is going to be bullied into signing something away. That's why you have these European leaders coming as backup tomorrow. Can you?
No, it isn't. That's not why they're coming as back. That's not true. No, but that's not why that's not true. They're not coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're not coming.
February Oval Office meeting in front of television cameras where President Zelensky.
Do you know how many meetings we've had since then?
Oh no, I know, and I was just up in Alaska watching the one with Vladimir Putin where a red carpet rolled out.
No, but with Zelensky, we've had more meetings. We've had one meeting with Putin and like a dozen meetings with Zelensky. So, but that's not true. They're not coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're coming here tomorrow because we've been working with the Europeans. We talked to them last week. There were meetings in the UK over the previous weekend.
And they said President Trump was going to demand a ceasefire
as early as Thursday. No, but you said that they're coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're not coming here tomorrow. Oh, this is such a stupid media narrative that they're coming here tomorrow because Trump is going to bully Zelensky into a bad deal. We've been working with these people for weeks on this stuff. They're coming here tomorrow because they chose to come here tomorrow. We invited them to come. We invited them to come. The president invited them to come.
But the president told those European leaders last week that he wanted a ceasefire. The president went on television, said he would walk out of the meeting if Vladimir Putin didn't agree with one. He said there would be severe consequences if he didn't agree to one. He said he'd walk out in 2 minutes. He spent 3 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and he did not get one. So there's
because obviously things happened during that meeting. Well, because obviously look, our goal here is not to stage some production for the world to say, oh, how dramatic, he walked out. Our goal here is to have a peace agreement to end this war, okay? And obviously we felt, and I agreed, that there was enough progress, not a lot of progress, but enough progress made in those talks to allow us to move to the next phase. If not, we wouldn't be having Zelensky flying all the way over here. We wouldn't be having all the Europeans coming all the way over here.
And this is quite an admission because he's actually saying not a lot of progress was made. There was some progress, not a lot, but enough to keep us going down this path rather than going down a path of putting what he would say is undue pressure or maybe due pressure on, but you know, pressure that would take you down a path whereby, you know, peace negotiations are not going to be forthcoming. But actually, you know, the problem is this is weak. You know, you bring Putin back to the table if, like I said earlier, if you are strong and if you whack massive sanctions on Russia to the point where they're forced back to the negotiating table. Like, if there's no ceasefire, you do not. We know this as parents and as teachers. You do not threaten and then not come through on your threats, because then you are seen as impotent, right? If you say to a child, if you do this, then that. If you do X, then Y. Child does X and you go, okay. Well, but next time, Y. And then next time comes around. If you do X, then Y. And then they do it and you're like, okay. Then the child learns that they can get away with murder, right? Literally, for Russia, that is the case. They can get away with murder because Trump does not come through on his threats. So, I understand the rationale that Marco Rubio is giving here, but I'm sorry, Trump shouldn't have offered those threats if he was not prepared to come through on them. It's as simple as that.
Now understand and take with a grain of salt, I'm not saying we're on the verge of a peace deal, but I am saying that we saw movement, enough movement to justify a follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans, enough movement for us to dedicate even more time to this. You talk about the sanctions. Look, at the end of the day, if peace is not going to be possible here, and this is just going to continue on as a war, people will continue to die by the thousands. The president has that option to then come in and impose new sanctions. But if he did this now, the moment the president puts those additional sanctions, that's the end of the talks. You've basically locked in at least another year to year and a half of war and death and destruction.
Not at all. No, that is not definitely the case. Like, you put massive sanctions on Russia, they are on the verge of being crippled anyway. They will be in all sorts of trouble, and they will be forced to capitulate and come to the negotiating table. And that's presumably why Trump initially made those threats. Again, like, if Rubio, if you believe what you are saying, then surely you have to admit that he shouldn't have made those threats in the first place. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it was right that he made those threats and it was right that he didn't come through on them. No. Both those things, I'm sorry, can't be true, given that the lessons learned from people who do not follow through on their threats.
We may unfortunately wind up there, but we don't want to wind up there. We want to wind up with a peace deal that ends this war so Ukraine can go on with the rest of their lives and rebuild their country and be assured that this is never going to happen again. That's the goal here. We're going to do everything possible to make that happen if it's doable. It will require both sides to make concessions. It will require both sides to get things they're asking for. That's how these deals are made, whether we like it or not.
Now, President Macron, he is being typically pretty forthright in his rhetoric, at least. We are talking about an imperialist and revisionist power that is today's Russia, which since 2008 has constantly sought to conquer new territories, has constantly revised international borders, and has never kept its promises of peace and non-aggression. And so if we are weak with Russia today, we will be preparing for tomorrow's conflicts. So no weakness, which I think is a statement to Trump, really, who has shown himself to be weak. Basically, what we are going to say is that we want peace. Everyone who is here tomorrow in Washington has been on the side of peace since day one, but we want a robust peace, a peace that would in no way be a capitulation, a peace that can in no way come at the expense of the security of Europeans. Absolutely spot on there. Nothing wrong with what he said there. And just to give you another nail in the coffin of the Alaska debacle. This is it's another mainstream media outlet excoriating Trump for what took place. This is the Financial Times. The editorial board there has given their view in an op-ed piece or an editorial piece. An incompetent way to pursue peace in Ukraine. This is Christopher Miller from the FT. Donald Trump's alignment with Vladimir Putin in Alaska made him look like a dupe. So they continue to come in, these analyses of the Alaska summit. Trump does not come out good in any single analysis that I have so far seen. It is universally accepted that was an absolute clown show, and it's all going to be about tomorrow's meeting. But if Trump is, as a prelude to the meeting, saying stuff like this, and if the Americans, even despite Rubio's protestations, if the Americans are actually putting pressure on by being, quote, unbelievably aggressive towards Ukraine in order that they concede land, then it's not looking good for Ukraine. I hope that Trump tomorrow has a road to Damascus moment, yet another one, and realizes the error of his ways over the last 24 hours or so. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.